also be for this inspection cycle that's coming in June. So if you are falling off the map, you're not actually falling off the map until 2026. So everything that happened last year with defensible space, your inspections, us coming around, and so forth, everyone on the peninsula will still see that consistently this year as well. So this is how the state rolls out the plan. It starts in the northern part of the state first. And as you can see, the maps in the entire state were actually redone. And the rollout phase is here, and we were the last area on the state to actually get the rollout, and like I said, recently disseminated to us. So as City Manager had already mentioned, the state responsibility area, the SRA, the Fire Hazard Severity Zone, was completed in 2024, but the maps weren't released to us until recently. So the county is actually a contractor of the state, so anything that is unincorporated, which is considered in the SRA area, Los Angeles County Fire Department does cover. And for an example, something that's very close to us that is completely SRA or state responsibility area is the island of Catalina, which myself and of course Chief Kelsey over here are responsible for. So the recommended LRA maps will be expanded to include the high and moderate fire severity zones that were not previously mapped in 2010. So this is going to be, I'm going to start now talking about the background and how they've come to the conclusions that they've come to as it relates to the new maps. So they take a 2-kilometer grid of climate data covering the years from 2003 to 2018, and that is being used to update the maps. Updated model will adjust fire intensity scores based on the most extreme fire weather at a given location. Ember transport is being modeled based on local distribution of observed wind, speed, and direction values instead of using a generic buffer distance for urban areas adjacent to wildfires. So those of you that have come to my previous presentations, I keep talking about EmberCast, 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 and winds, and this is why the EmberCast has been so important in the updating of these maps and the forecasting of those embers. So the new maps are coming out. They will be adopted by the local city. Local cities can add to or increase the fire hazard severity zone. They can choose to make it larger than the proposed maps are. Any additions to the very high fire severity zone require substantial evidence of record to make the change. So that would be historical fire weather or weather patterns on the peninsula that would suggest the fire hazard severity zone be expanded. However, the local agency cannot remove or decrease the size of the fire hazard severity zones as recommended by the State Fire Marshal. Why are the fire hazard zones maps being updated? So the maps are being updated to more accurately reflect the zones in California that are susceptible to wildfire. The hazard mapping process will incorporate new science and local climate data and improve fire assessment modeling and determined hazard ratings. So what do the maps actually measure? What do they represent? The fire hazard severity zone map evaluates hazards, not the risk. Hazard is based on the physical conditions that create a likelihood and expected fire behavior over a 30 to 50 year period without considering mitigation measures such as home hardening, recent wildfire, or fuel reduction efforts. Risk is the potential damage a fire can do to the area under existing conditions, accounting for any modifications such as fuel reduction projects, defensible space, and ignition resistance building constructions. How are fire hazard zones determined? So, CAL FIRE uses the best available science and data to develop and field test a model that served as the basis of zone assignments. The model evaluated the probability of the area burning and potential fire behavior in the area. Many factors were included such as fire history, vegetation, flame length, glowing embers, proximity to wildland, terrain, and of course weather. What data will be included in the new model, and how does this differ from the previous models? So as previously stated, a 2-kilometer grid of climate data covering the years from 2003 to 18 is being used for the update. The previous model used stock weather inputs across the state to calculate wildland fire intensity scores. The updated model will adjust fire intensity scores based on the most extreme fire weather at a given location, considering temperature, humidity, and wind speed. Now, those of you that have been to my other presentations, temperature, humidity, and wind speeds are also what calculate our red flag conditions or our critical fire weather. In addition, ember transport, again, is being modeled based on local distributions of observed wind speed and direction values instead of using a generic buffer distance for urban areas adjacent to wildlands. So what is the difference between various fire hazard severity zones? Classification of wildland zone as moderate, high, or very high fire hazard is based on the average hazard across the area included in the zone, which have a minimum size of 200 acres. In wildlands, hazard is a function of a modeled flame length under the worst conditions and annual burn probability. Both these factors generally increase with increasing hazard level, but there may be instances where one value is very high and the other is low, pushing the overall hazard rating into a more intermediate ranking. On average, the modeled flame length and burn probability increase by roughly 40 to 60% between hazard classes. Classification outside of wildland areas is based on the fire hazard of the adjacent wildland and the probability of flames and embers threatening buildings. Why does this model place an emphasis on the spread of embers? Embers spread wildfire because they can travel long distances in wind and ignite vegetation on roofs, attics, by getting into vents and on decks. So as previously in some of my presentations, we talked about that ember cast. So ember cast is really what's responsible for significant fire spread and also getting into those structures. And under the most extreme conditions, we can see embers spotting fires 5 miles in front of a flaming fire front. So that's why ember cast is so important, and that home hardening aspect is extremely important as well. Is my property in the very high fire severity zone? So you can search your address by your current designation on the web at OSFM. The site is here. You can plug your address into that site, and it will tell you exactly which zone that you respective address and where you live, if in what zone it actually is in. Give you a second to take that.
And the PowerPoint slides will be on the website along with the recording on rpvca.gov/emergency. And this map is also embedded there.
Everybody that wanted it, were they able to take down that site to look up their respective address? Okay. So what are the key elements of the fire hazard severity zone model? 2 key elements: probability of an area burning and expected fire behavior under extreme fuel and weather conditions. The zones reflect areas that have similar burn probabilities and fire behavior characteristics. The factors considered in determining the hazard within wildland areas are fire history, flame length, terrain, local weather, and potential over a 50-year period. Outside of wildlands, the model considers factors that might lead to buildings being threatened, including terrain, weather, urban vegetation cover, blowing embers, proximity to wildland, significant fire history, and a fire hazard severity in nearby wildlands. Why is my property in a different zone than the adjacent area, which looks very similar to mine? In wildland areas, zone edges occur based on distance to the wildland edge. Because hazard in these areas is largely determined by incoming embers from adjacent wildland, urban areas that are similar in vegetation type and housing density may have a change in fire hazard severity zone class as the distance to the wildland edge increases. Areas immediately adjacent to wildland receive the same fire hazard severity zone as the wildland where fire originates. And the model that produces lower scores as the distance to wildland edge increases. Now we're going to get a lot of questions probably coming up, like my neighbor across the street is outside the zone, but I'm in the zone. But just understand that a line has to be drawn at some point and at some particular location, and there's just going to be a coincidence where that might happen to you or your neighbor or somebody that you know, or in your exact neighborhood yourselves. In wildland areas, zone edges are a result of the way zones are delineated. Specifically, zones represent areas of similar slope and fuel potential. Zone boundaries divide zones based on geographic and vegetation features that align with fire hazard potential. Although at a local scale, it may appear that the immediate area is similar on both sides of the edge, the class value within a zone is based on the average hazard score across the whole zone. Areas that are in the zone but not immediately adjacent to a local area can have an influence on the final zone classification. So I know that's very confusing, but they use some very sophisticated modeling on all aspects of the peninsula to update the zones to their current state. And all of these zones fall under the legislative process. The state legislature has passed a law for cities and counties to implement. Cities must ratify, though the state can also ratify it as well. And this is Assembly Bill 211 if you should like to look that up. More about the legislative process. Timeline. Two concurrent events. The recommended LRA fire hazard severity zone maps must be made available for public review and comment within 30 days of receipt from the state fire marshal. So that's what we're kind of doing tonight. We're getting this out there to all of you. The recommended maps must be adopted by ordinance within 120 days of receipt from the state fire marshal. So the city is on a timeline of 120 days from their date of receipt in order to adopt these new maps. Here's some more on the timeline of maps and so forth. There's a lot more information on the CAL FIRE website. There's even a link here at the bottom where you can compare the old to the new with that sliding scale that City Manager Maradian was speaking about. That's all I really have as far as the maps are concerned. I know it's very kind of complicated and kind of, but just understand that it wasn't a haphazard decision that the state made, like, oh, we're just going to cut all these houses and addresses out. They did some very sophisticated modeling in order to reach the conclusions that they did. That's all I have about the maps. I guess questions now, or?
Could you talk a little about the implications for next year's festival space?
Yeah, so the question was implications from this year to next year. So this year will be exactly the way that it was last year as far as defensible space and the associated inspections. Next year you'll see a difference. So if your respective address is falling off of the list, you're not going to see us next year. You're not going to receive anything in the mail, and you're just going to go about life as normal. So that's the big question on the changes that we're going to see on the peninsula, the entire peninsula as well, from this year to next year. Anything else?
And the differences, we now have, you're off the map, you're moderate, you're higher, you're very high.
Yeah, so there's different zones, like she said, very high, moderate, and high, and so forth. Only the very high fire severity zones are inspected by the fire department. Now, it's still a good idea, and it's very prudent for all of you to still maintain your properties in a state of fire readiness, and of course, maintain your houses with the home hardening aspects included. But yeah, next year there will be a change as far as how many inspections we will have on the peninsula.
I'm going to talk a little about the city's work, and then we'll
Sure.
go to Q&A.
Okay, thank you.
I have a question. We'll do Q&A in just 1 minute. I just want to talk about our steps, and then we'll walk through any questions for the defensible space or anything related to the map. Just so you guys are aware of what the city's doing, we received those maps March 24. We're doing this info session. We do have a webpage online. It has that sliding scale. It will have the recording for this. It will have the information you saw outside. That will be all available. Any questions and their answers, I'll have those uploaded by next week. So keep an eye out for that. And then if you're online, if you're watching this or you're watching this later, you're welcome to email me any questions or feedback. lmohammed@rpvca.gov. I'll include anything I get in the next few days on that Q&A list, and if you want to send me something after that, you can, and I'll do my best to answer it for you. After this meeting, city staff will huddle up with LA County Fire, and we will assess the maps too. We will provide a suggestion on the adoption of the maps. As Chief Kane said, we can recommend raising areas, so we can move up areas that are no longer in any zone or in a moderate or high zone. We can move those up to high or very high, however we would like. So we can make that, but we cannot reduce the zones. We will have our regular city council meeting on June 17th, where we will present our recommendations to city council, and then whatever ends up coming from that, we will put this on a consent item for adoption of the ordinance of the maps on July 1st. And as Chief Kane said, 30 days after, within 30 days, we need to submit that to the state fire marshal, and this will be incorporated in the multi-jurisdictional hazard mitigation plan and our general plan safety element. At both of those are currently being updated this year, so that will be incorporated there. So now for questions. If anyone wants to come up to the mic and speak, feel free to. You can raise your hand, just speak loudly if you would like. And then again, if you have questions online, feel free to email those if you think of something later. And that's our website where that webpage will be. So. So anyone who wants to ask a question, feel free to come up to the mic and you can ask.
Hi, good evening. Gwen Butterfield, Rancho Palos Verdes resident. I have a question on the presentation. It was stated that the city can add in areas, but that it requires substantial evidence of record to make the change. I'd like to know if you could elaborate on that a bit further, being a resident who's grateful that we're no longer in the very high fire zone.
Yeah.
I'd like to understand that better.
So evidence that would be pertinent to make a change like that or raise a certain level back up to in that area would be like historical fire data. If over the last 100 years we have records of where fires typically take place, how they travel, which the ways they spread. So that would be one piece of evidence they could use, say, in a certain area, like there's frequent fires in this area, they tend to travel in this particular direction. It would be great if these neighborhoods here remained in those particular zones. Also, if a canyon or an area of the peninsula were to come into what we call alignment with those northeasterly winds, which are also known as the Santa Ana winds, where the winds are constantly blowing up the canyon during those northeasterly fire weather conditions, that could also be a time when a city could choose, like, hey, this area is prone to these northeasterly, very dry, super hot winds. It would be great if these areas also had were raised in elevation. Another thing would be fuel loads. If the city were to think that there is excessive fuel loads in some of the open spaces, it could potentially gain a lot of heat and make flame or fire travel exponentially in a certain area and jump to different neighborhoods. That would also be some evidence of concern that could potentially raise that area back into that fire hazard severity zone. City manager, do you have anything else?
Yeah, let me just, at this point, there's no indication that we're going to present or recommend to the city council an upgrading or intensification of the severity zone maps. That said, I think the practice of all of you in the community should remain the same. We should still be vigilant and do our efforts to harden our homes and protect our properties. In fact, what I've asked the building official to do is to look at our building code and see if, when we come to the council in June, whether we should recommend any amendments to the building code that would require home hardening as part of an addition or new construction. We wouldn't require it just off the cuff saying every household needs to do X, Y, and Z. But if you were doing a substantial or significant renovation or remodel or tear down, rebuild, what would those new building standards be? So the building official is looking at that, and of course, if we're going to propose any amendments, there would be public notification on those changes to the building code, which is chapter 15 of the Rancho Palos Verdes Municipal Code.
And just to highlight something Chief Kane said earlier, again, what Ara said, we're not We have to assess, but we're at this time not looking at increasing those zones. However, if we did decide to increase a zone to medium or high, it would not have any implications to defensible space inspections. So if there's, you're not in a zone and we had a discussion and for one of the reasons Chief Kane mentioned, said, hey, we want this area to be moderate, that would not have an implication towards defensible space inspections. Part of our assessment will be what other implications could it potentially have, right? So that is something we'll be looking at, but just wanted to highlight that.
I'm curious, how many, by raise of hands, how many of your properties were downgraded?
I don't know what it was before.
How many
You
of you
know-
are coming off the list? Yeah.
I don't know. If it says no,
I-
it says no,
I-
trouble it.
I think, Maria, I think you
No
are coming off the
fire hazard
list.
severity zone.
And prior to this, so our 2008, I know this map is small, but it was literally just a small little sliver of the east side that was not in a very high fire severity zone.
So my house was in the Eastview area and it was off the.
What street?
In the mountain streets.
Okay, you're not
We're
in.
not in the CAL FIRE high fire severity zone. However, the city has said that the whole city is in a high fire severity zone. So any kind of building remodeling and things like that have to be, high fire severity zone type
Construction, yeah.
So all the windows have to be tempered and things like that. So is that the kind of thing that we will be expecting moving forward? Even though some of the parts of the city are not in the high fire severity zone, will the city designate everything as?
Yes, most likely yes. Because of the nature of the entire peninsula, and as we saw, I mean, there were areas that back in January had to evacuate, and there was a risk of fire in areas that are not even mapped as a fire risk area or a hazard area. So yes, the building code is a very different mechanism to encourage and to require the home hardening to protect properties. So, and that, like I just mentioned, we are looking, I've asked the building official to look at the building code to see if we need to strengthen it to add more requirements. And that's only triggered if you're doing a substantial addition or remodel or a tear down rebuild. But right now, in terms of defensible space and the clearing and all those requirements that LA County Fire Department requires, especially in your neighborhood, you were not part of that high fire severity zone, and you're still not under the new maps. Yes, and maybe should we grab the?
Well, I was going to, but then people just start raising their hands.
I'll play talk show host. Here you go.
Oh, goodness, okay, coming to me, huh? There's a paper out there that says that, if you get rid of your lawn and stuff, that's like $3, whatever. My question about that, about 5 years ago, I have a little house, but it's a humongous lawn, 5,000 square feet. And it would have cost $27,000 back then to get rid of the thing, and I think they were offering me like $8,000, which is a bit much for a retired solicitor. But the problem was not taking out the lawn. The problem was all the flowers, or all the things they wanted planted in it. In other words, they wanted that entire area covered. And I don't need to have that much cactus in my life. I mean, why do we have to have that much planting? I don't mind a little dirt or maybe stone coverage. So, in other words, it's a discouragement to do what we're supposed to do when you demand that they have that much planting.
And who did you talk to? Who was the rebate? Was it through Cal Water or was it through the West Basin Water District? It wasn't through the city, so it was.
Okay, it was about, as I say, 5 years ago, and I don't know who was doing it then. Is this through the city this time?
No, the city's not offering these programs. These are offered through either Cal Water or the West Basin Water District.
Well, how do we deal with the fact that they want too much planted?
Well, I think that's a conversation you need to have with their planners who are offering this rebate program. I think right now it's being through SoCal Water Smart, and that's through the West Basin Water District.
Okay.
So we'll give you that information. We can put you in touch with some people over
Yeah,
there.
because that's what stopped me in my tracks.
Okay, understood. If you want to hand the mic behind you.
There you go.
Great, thank you so much. I just wanted to piggyback on my last question, and I know that I guess you mentioned something about the building code. The building code is changing, I guess, next year, right? So, are there?
Let me clarify, not necessarily. So
Okay.
what I've said is I've asked the building official to review the code and to determine whether amendments are needed. So that hasn't been determined yet.
Okay, but the California Fire Code will be coming into effect in January, next year, 2025, right? So, I'm
When you
not
say
sure.
the fire code, do you mean the building code or do you mean this map, the hazard severity zone map?
So, California Building Code and all of the codes will be coming into effect in January.
Okay, so there's an update to the building
Yeah.
codes?
So, I guess my question was, what will be on the, I guess, the new, requirements, and if it is going to be more stricter, because that
They
would
usually
be,
do get more strict.
that would be required in the high fire severity zones, right?
So the building code, the California building code gets updated approximately every 3 years, and the city does adopt the state code, and then we add to that code requirements based on the city being in a high fire zone. So yes, it's most likely that we will continue to add things as we learn that there are more tools in the box that we can use to protect our property. So if you're looking at building, it sounds like you're going through a construction process, and if you want to get in under the current codes, you can, but if you wait, yeah, you'll be subject to the next version of the building codes.
And you don't know what, I guess.
Not at this time.
coming.
I'm not aware of what the changes are. I do know currently in the building code section, which is chapter 15 of the municipal code, has extra requirements or additional requirements because of the fire zone that we're in. Yeah, and one of the things, yes, we require a certain type of roof material. We require all new construction to be double pane windows. In fact, they say that one of the things, and I don't know if you touched on this, but I know Chief Kane has mentioned this in the past, one of the reasons why the embers and fires spread and structures burn is not only do embers get into the attic and the crawl space and burn the structure from the inside out, but the heat gets so intense that single pane windows end up bursting, and then the embers get in, the fire gets in, and structures burn from the inside out. So it is known that double pane windows will help save structure. So it's an upfront cost that you have to bear, but it protects your property, it hardens your property. And plus it's good for insulation and soundproofing and all those other great things. But I know it's very expensive, trust me, I know.
My question is for the LA County Fire Department. I was wondering if there's a way to obtain prior defensible space inspections, if they exist for a particular property address, and that's basically, if you're a prospective buyer for a property and you're just, having to investigate doing escrow. So defensible space
Yeah, so,
inspections, are they available?
Yeah, but it was kind of a two-part question. So if you're looking to buy a house and you want to know what zone it is in, so you can, where you're potentially going to buy, or you want to know.
No, if you already know a defensible space inspection is required of that particular property, and you're already in escrow for that particular property. And you want
Yeah,
to know-
if there is a home, I think this got cut off. If you're looking to buy a home, the realtor has to disclose that house is in the fire hazard severity zone. And prior to it being closed in escrow, it does have to meet all of those defensible space requirements.
Yes,
Yes.
and how do I find out if there is such an inspection that was already done in prior years?
That would be, if you're gonna sell or buy, that would be through your realtor. Or,
Does the fire department not have a record of that?
we can look up your address and see, my colleague over here to the right might be able to look up that address.
Wasn't there a map, there was some sort of interactive map where you
There-
put the address?
There
Yeah.
is, so I can show you after. We do have a request map where you can submit a request to either get an AB 38 inspection done if there's no prior record, or your local inspector for this area can pull up the previous defensible space inspection, so it would be for 2024. They can provide that to you, and then that can be used as your disclosure.
Very helpful.
So I can give you that number, and I can show you the requesting link, and then we can go from there.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, no problem.
If you don't mind, what street, you don't have to give the address, but what,
Irish Road.
High Ridge? Currently that's in the, currently it is in the high fire severity
Yes,
zone.
and that's why I'm asking.
But it looks like, I think that's being High Ridge may be downgraded. And we could show you afterwards on the map here, we've got the streets here.
Okay, I've already been informed that that inspection is required.
Okay.
Thank you.
Any other question? I don't know where the microphone went,
It's
but,
right here. I'm just-
all right. I think all the audio went out. I know Marie has a question. We'll get you them.
Yeah, I have.
Well, I don't even think the mic's working, so go ahead and just shout.
Okay, my first question, I'm curious if, or what type of fire designation the Palisades area has or had, and
That's not LA County local jurisdiction.
so they don't have.
I don't know what they were based on.
That map will show that as well.
Yeah.
So the same exact map, the link that
I have a link.
Nate
I have a
shared,
link
and
for that.
also on, if you go to rpvca.gov or.
Even though they're not in the same.
It's everything, it's all California.
Oh, it's
But
all-
Pacific Palisades is City of Los Angeles, so it's the LA Fire Department.
Yeah. So I just have to, I just wondered if you knew.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, if you go to the app or the website, it'll show you all of California. You can just put in an address anywhere. It's the state's map, but I think we had a map.
No, I can speak for the Eaton fire. Altadena is in the very high fire severity zone.
It was, okay.
I can pull up
And then another question, I just may be confused, but I thought I heard you saying that the current inspections that you have been doing are going to continue through 2025, and then starting in 2026, it would be adjusted to this new map?
Correct.
I think that's what, okay. So then after we go into 2026, if, let's say we're not in the very high fire, and we have a concern about, dead brush of our next door neighbor, or that kind of thing, are you gonna come out and try to enforce
If you
some
call
sort
the local jurisdiction station or the city, hey, I have a concern about the neighbors because of X, Y, and Z. We will come out and take a look at that. Now, enforceability, once you're off the map, could be a little bit of an issue.
Yeah, that's why I was asking. Okay. And then my third thing is that map, which, I haven't looked at it in great detail, but is, the Los Verdes Golf Course on that map? Is it, okay. It's in the white part? The white part means moderate? No, it means what? I thought there was high.
So if you look closely,
Very
maybe
high.
afterwards with the lights on, the red is the very high fire,
Right.
the orange is high, and the yellow is moderate, and then everything beyond that is not in a designated hazard area.
I see, and then you're saying the Los Verdes Golf Course is in the non-designated?
Yes, and it looks like there's a sliver of it that's in the moderate and high, but it's not in the very high fire.
And moderate and high are not subject to defensible space inspections.
They're not, they're not starting in 2026?
This year we
And
are
they are.
keeping, so this year, everybody aside from our small sliver on that east side, which can be shown on that map too, it's part of the defensible
Okay,
space.
so if the there's a fence, and if some overgrown foliage is there within 5 feet of a person's structure that's their home, where they live, the golf course should be clearing that area on their side
For this year, yes.
for this year. And is that part of your inspection this year, is the golf course?
Yes.
It is?
Mhm.
Oh, okay. Thank you.
Sorry, the mic's out, just try to speak loud.
I just wanted to express my, my gratitude for the goat program, which is, helps to clear the, I wanted to express my great gratitude for the goat program that helps to clear the load areas, especially in the canyons, and so the Conservancy has done a great job, but we hope that program will continue, and maybe it can be applied to certain areas that it can assist. So I think that's an important supplement to the overall mitigation. Thank you.
Yeah, what'll be interesting is the city's subject with all of the city owns all this open space areas, and we are required to do certain clearance off every roadway and in the open space preserve areas. So it'll be very interesting what this, this implication of this changing of the designation will have on our open space areas. But you can see most of our preserve areas are still in very high varsity, rightfully so. Yeah, and the city's been doing the GO program, I want to say almost 10, 12 years, and we were one of the first cities to use goats for its fuel modifications. Ever since we started doing it, all these other cities and private landowners have been following suit as well. So, yeah.
I have a question. What's gonna change? Are we losing resources or nothing? No?
No. It's less regulations on a property owner in terms of the defensible space. I mean, I got calls from people saying, I can't believe I'm not on the map, and I'm like, you should be kind of grateful for that, because then you're not subject after next year. You're not going to be subject to all the inspections and the requirements to do all the clearing.
And that is wonderful, but really want to stress to take the steps to do defensible space at your home, whether or not there's an inspection, whether or not you're in a zone. Fires can still affect you even if you're not in a zone. If you look at Altadena and Pasadena, the maps on there, you'll see parts of the areas that burn are not in any zone, let alone a fire, a very high severity zone. Fires can spread. So for garden defensible space, it's the best way to protect yourself. You get to bypass some regulations and inspections. It makes your life easier, but that doesn't mean you shouldn't take steps to protect your home.
I'm sorry for the redundancy, but in June, when they do their natural inspections and stuff like that, are you saying these things are not happening then? They're happening the following year?
This June, everyone aside from that tiny sliver of RPV should have already received their letters, will be going through the inspections. As of next year, anyone who is not in the very high fire severity zone will no longer be subject to the defensible space inspection. So as of 2026, you may not receive a letter in 2026, that's because you are no longer designated in a very high fire severity zone.
I think that will be And then we have for the rest of the year to get this done in the fire zone.
So the defensible space inspections are June and July, correct? Or-
Yeah, so you're kind of supposed to be getting ready now for, because you've been doing it probably, is this your first year in that house?
Oh, no, I've
Yeah.
been there 46 years,
Right, so you should know the program a little bit, so, because you've been previously inspected 46 times.
but I've always passed it.
Well, there you
Now
go,
we're
then
getting
you
tough.
don't have anything to worry about. No, so the inspection this year will be the same as it was last year. So if you were fine last year and you've been maintaining your property appropriately, then you should have no problem this year.
Oh, so 25 is set. I'm okay for that in the higher fire zone.
Maybe we'll talk offline.
Okay,
Yeah.
thank you. I appreciate that.
You're gonna be okay. Yes, sir.
So next year, we're going to add the Zone Zero inspections. And is there any written documentation on Zone Zero available yet? Because that's going to make some big changes to a lot, for a lot
Yeah,
of people.
so I'll speak a little bit about it, I might have to confer with my colleague over here. So Zone Zero is slated to be adopted by Sacramento, but has not yet officially been adopted by Sacramento.
Gotcha.
So what we're hearing so far is it's gonna be phased in as well once it is adopted. Okay, so what we're gonna be looking for this year in Zone Zero is anything that is growing and attached to your house. So if you have bougainvillea, wisteria, any kind of climbing vines on the structure, that's what we're really gonna be looking for this year. That's the only thing we're gonna be looking for as it relates to Zone Zero. Now, everything else that was previously included into Zone 1 will stay current.
Mhm.
Okay, after this year, there'll be incremental phase-in of all the regulations as it relates to Zone Zero as they are approved by legislation at the state level. Did I say that correctly?
Correct, yeah.
Zone Zero is the first 5 feet from the exterior wall of your house.
Regardless of whether you're in severe or moderate
No,
or high zone?
if you're on this map, Zone Zero applies to you.
Okay, if you're in a severe area only,
Yes.
right? So my concern is, now that we've been downgraded much of RPV, there may not be a process to deal with, hardscaping.
Correct.
Whereas before, we used to get inspected, and we have a community of people that have plants too close to their homes and structure, there was a process. But now, all of that is gone. Is there like a intermediate process that's going to be put in place so that we can address those risks?
So the onus of those kind of issues are actually placed now on the homeowner to be prudent in their preparation for wildfire. Yes.
I understand the data from this study ended in 2018, and, I'll just disclose, I just moved here after being dislocated by the Eaton fire. My family lost their house in the Palisades fire as well. Is anything being done to account for those two unprecedented disasters, in light of this now 7-year-old data?
That's a great question. I don't have the answer to that. Do you have?
I don't.
Yeah.
One thing I can say is the local jurisdictions are doing their own assessments, so each city should be doing exactly what RPV is, well, maybe not exactly, but similar. They're gonna be assessing, they're gonna be opening for public comment, they're gonna be looking at it, And if they wanted to move an area to a very high fire severity zone that's not, with the new map that isn't gonna be in it, they can make a justification using those recent fires and say, hey, no, based on the new data from 2018 to 2025, we wanna move this up. So CAL FIRE made the maps, but they are allowing local jurisdictions to look at them and utilize data that's more recent to try to move things up. So if something is moved up to very high from moderate or no or high, there has to be a justification, but that justification can be, look at our previous fire. That data can help with it. If they want to move it up to high or moderate, they don't need a justification, but they can still use recent fire data, so. Is it working?
The city has a building code that is more stringent than the California Building Code to account for the fire risk here in Rancho Palos Verdes and the peninsula. So we do require, if you were, now that you're locating here, if you were to build a new house or do a substantial addition, you'd be required to do or install certain improvements or materials to harden the property. And we're not planning on downgrading that or changing that. Yeah. Yeah, Marie.
This is a question from someone at home. Can you speak at all to the effects of this redesignation for insurance, for home insurance benefits?
You know, none of us are qualified to even comment on that. And you know, my comment at the very beginning was my own personal opinion, so I should make that very clear. I mean, you know, I know from my own experience how when you go through a transaction and they're telling you, look, you're in a risk area, you can't even get insurance now, fire insurance. You have to go through the FAIR plan, and so we don't know what the impacts are going to be with the insurance. And they will always say, and they being the state and so forth, that no, this map doesn't influence the your insurance.
Well, and so they are, obviously, I mean, the insurance commissioner has all the maps, is that, the updates and.
Every agency, all the insurance companies, they all have access to these maps.
So there are some flyers outside with a FAQ from California Department of Insurance on basically how these maps impact or don't impact the insurance. Part of that discusses the difference between like risk and mitigation with insurance, utilizing multiple models along with mitigation efforts, which these maps don't look at mitigation, they only look at risk. But there's some great information out there with some contacts too, if you want to talk to someone directly. There's also information from United Policyholders, which is a nonprofit that provides advocacy and guidance on dealing with your insurance if you're dropped or you're trying to get insurance or whatever it might be. So I do really encourage everyone to take a look at all of that. But yeah, we unfortunately do not have the expertise to speak exactly on that. The FAQ is the best I could get you at the moment. And for anyone who's texting anyone online or anything, please know that I will make a Q&A list. We will include that online. So if you missed out on part of the Q&A, we will include a list online with those questions. And again, you can always reach out and we'll do our best to get you some answers.
So we're going to call it a wrap. I think if you have any questions, we'll stick around and answer any questions. Again, the city's got all this information. If you want to access the interactive map, you're curious where your friend designation is over in the Palisades area, you can go on the map and look at things. But thank you for coming out. Please spread the word. Mark your calendar. June 17th is when it'll go to the city council. If you're curious what the ultimate recommendation will be, you can go to the city's website and download the staff report. Thank you. Thank you for coming out. Have a good night. Yeah, which street are you on?
I'm gonna
You're on the Pirate? Yeah, over in Ladera Linda.